Hi everybody, this is Justina from JustynaTHandMade, sharing with you another project of mine. As you can tell, this one features see-through vinyl or clear vinyl again. Recently I discovered the enjoyment of creating pattern with a see-through vinyl, so this is another one I want to share with you. This is a cute little pouch that you can pack up and also have visibility to what's inside. It's a pretty sizable pouch. As you can see, you can put a good amount of items inside. And it holds everything nicely, and then you can also see what you have inside. My recent travels, I noticed that I really enjoy having cosmetic bags that will easily show you what you have inside. You are not going through multiple pouches to find the product that you are in search for. You can just clearly see it, what's inside of each of them. So I decided to create another one of those cosmetic bags that are great for travel. This pattern is free. Those panels are created from squares, and I'm gonna walk you through in the video how to create your own pattern based on the desirable size of the pouch you would like to create. All supplies that you need for this project is just a waterproof canvas and see-through vinyl, and a piece of zipper with the zipper pull. I'm gonna list the supplies in the description box below. Also, in this video, I'm gonna use the technique I showed you previously, the French seam technique that will enclose the raw edges. So although we are not lining the pouch, we're not gonna have exposed raw edges of the waterproof canvas. Waterproof canvas, it's a polyester material, so it's not gonna fray when you cut it. It has a rubbery backing. That's why it's great for a cosmetic bag, because although it looks like a fabric from the outside, inside you can wipe it with the damp cloth. If you are already a subscriber to my channel and you're returning for another tutorial of mine, thank you so much for choosing to watch another of my videos. If this is the first time you came across my channel, I hope you're gonna enjoy this tutorial and that you're gonna consider subscribing. Also, please make sure to visit the free pattern playlist. Then you're gonna have a list of all patterns that I created that are free for everybody to access. Also, if you would like to join my little sewing community, the link to my Facebook group is in the description below. Please just follow the link and join our Facebook group. Also, if you would like to support my small business, in the description box below you can find a link to my Etsy store and review all patterns that I currently offer for purchase. And now, if you would like to see me creating this cute little frame square pouch, please keep watching. To start our project, we're gonna prep all our supplies and our cuts. First, I'm gonna run through the list of supplies really quick, and then I'm gonna explain how to prep your cuts. So we're gonna use a waterproof canvas for this pouch because this pouch doesn't have lining, and as I want to use it for a cosmetic bag, I want to make sure it's water resistant. So I have my waterproof canvas, which has the water resistant backing. I have my clear vinyl panel because I want to be able to see what's in my pouch. So that's for my little pouch window. I have a zipper that I cut to size and a little piece of binding, and this is basically the amount of binding we're just going to use for this project. So if you are not very comfortable with binding, not to worry, there's not going to be much of it. Also, I have my zipper pull that I customized for the project. I just decided to use a little butterfly. So first of all, you're gonna start with cutting your two main panels. I choose to cut them as squares. You can basically use any size you desire. You can make it bigger or smaller. I wouldn't go much smaller than what I'm doing, and this size it's 10 by 10 inches. So just keep that in mind, because we're gonna decrease the size of the pouch as we are boxing our corners. So that's something to keep in mind. So when you have your two panels cut out, and they should be the same size, this is one of them will be the front and one of them will be the back of your pouch. Then you're gonna take your ruler, and I have it marked already on this panel. So you wanna take a ruler and mark a place, a corner that it's 2 inches from each side. You're just gonna take a ruler, measure 2 inches from each side, and just mark that point. And you're gonna repeat that all 4 corners. When you have those marks ready, you're gonna take a larger ruler and just connect those spots. That's how we're gonna establish the size of our window. When you have the window drawn on the front panel of your pouch, and you want to draw it on the wrong side of the panel, you're gonna take your clear vinyl and you're gonna cut a piece that is 1/2 inch larger on each side of your square. So you can all measure your square and just add 1 inch to the length and to the width of it, and then cut the vinyl. Or you can take your vinyl, just mark it with scissors, and just make sure that you have a piece that is 1/2 inch larger on each side of your projected window of your pouch. So now that we have the clear vinyl and the main panels cut, we also gonna cut a zipper that is about the length of your top edge of your outer panels. A piece of binding. I just cut about 5 inches by 3/4 of an inch piece of waterproof canvas, again because it doesn't fray, so I can just use it as a binding. And I brought my zipper pull. So those are all supplies that you need to cut. And now we're gonna proceed with cutting our see-through window in the front panel. So you're gonna take your rotary blade, a ruler, and you're gonna cut a square that is 1/2 inch inside of your marks. So I'm just gonna make a mark that is 1/2 inch. And just make my first cut. This doesn't need to be super precise, but you have to make sure you're not gonna be cutting too close to the marked window. Now I'm gonna take my shears and I'm gonna clip. I wanna make sure that the panel is cut all around. You can keep the scrap if you like. And now that we have the bulk of the fabric cut out, we're gonna make cuts that go straight to the point of our marked square on our panel. Now that you have your panel prepped like this, you're gonna use some double-sided tape, and you're gonna place a strip of double-sided tape along all those cut edges. You want to make sure you are not too close to the drawn line, because we're gonna basically fold the fabric over, and then when we are sewing or top stitching our clear panel inside, we don't want to be sewing through the tape. My tape is really sticky, so it's not really great to sew through, but if you have a sewing tape that it's not gonna make your needle sticky, you don't have to worry about it. Now we're gonna start folding our fabric. So you wanna make sure you are folding it where you mark your line. Now that you have all four sides folded, you want to flip it over. Make sure that everything looks nice and straight from the front. It looks like I need to fold this corner up a little more. All right, now I'm happy with how my fold looks like. I'm gonna affix my see-through panel inside. So I want to make sure it's nice and centered, and I'm creating a nice window frame with my clear vinyl. I don't want to use double-sided tape because it's going to be visible after my panel is sewed in. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a Scotch tape to just temporarily affix my see-through panel to my frame. If you have a directional print, this is the time to pay attention to your print. So make sure this is the way the print should be facing up, if that's going to be your top edge with the zipper. My print is not directional, so that's not a problem, but if you are using something with a directional print, make sure that this is the top edge and your print is facing up. And now that we have our front panel prepped, we're gonna take it to the machine and we're gonna top stitch around the frame with the 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and 3.5 stitch length. If you think that the vinyl gonna stick to the bed of your machine while you're sewing, you can use some tissue paper or parchment paper to put it on the bottom, so the fabric slides freely while you sew. So now let's take it to the machine and affix the clear vinyl in our frame. Now that the clear vinyl panel is sewn into your frame, we're gonna move on to constructing our pouch. So you're gonna take your zipper and you're gonna center it along the top edge of your pouch. You wanna make sure you are extending it a tiny bit over the edge, because that's how we're gonna cover the raw edge of the waterproof canvas with the zipper tape after we top stitch the zipper. So you want to make sure it extends just a tiny bit over, and you're gonna clip it in place. When you have that prepped, you're gonna take it to the machine and you're gonna sew the zipper on with the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and you can use 3.5 or 2.5 stitch length. Now that the zipper is sewn in, you're gonna flip it over. You're gonna finger press the seam allowance so it folds behind the panel. And when you have the panel prepped like this, you're gonna take it to the machine and you're gonna top stitch on the panel, making sure your seam allowance is lying flat behind it. You're gonna be sewing with the 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and 3.5 stitch. After the zipper is top stitched, you're gonna take your second panel and making sure that the top edge where the zipper is attached is the same length. You're gonna flip the panel over and again place the zipper along the top edge, extending it a little bit over the raw edge of the waterproof canvas. When you have your panels prepped like this, you're gonna take it to the machine and you're gonna sew the zipper tape on with the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and 3.5 or 2.5 stitch length. Now that the other side of the zipper is attached, we're gonna do what we did with the front panel. So you wanna make sure that your seam allowance is pressed under the panel. Just make sure to finger press it well. You can use iron, just be careful, don't put the hot iron onto your clear vinyl or onto the wrong side of the waterproof canvas, but I think the finger pressing it's sufficient enough. When you have your panel prepped like this, you're gonna take it to the machine and you're gonna sew along the folded edge with the 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and 3.5 stitch length. So now we're gonna be top stitching the second panel onto our zipper. Now that our zipper is attached to both panels, we're gonna work on our top corners. So first you wanna mark your seam allowance on each side, which is gonna be 3/8 of an inch. And now that we have our seam allowance marked, we're gonna mark 3/4 squares, measuring from the middle of the zipper coils to the seam allowance. So I'm gonna place the 3/4 of an inch mark in the middle of my coils, and making sure I'm measuring from the seam allowance, it's also 3/4 of an inch. I want to mark that, and then I want to do the same on the other side. Repeat that on the other end. Now that we have it marked, we're gonna cut that part out. Now I'm gonna take my lighter and just melt the ends of the zipper so it doesn't fray. Now also it's a good time to insert your zipper pull-on. Keep in mind the direction of your zipper pull. I want my pouch to be closed with the zipper pull on the left, so I'm gonna insert it from the right to the left. Now that I have my zipper pull on, I'm gonna place my panels wrong sides together and clip them all around. And now when I have my project prep like this, I'm gonna take it to the machine and I'm gonna sew along those 3 edges with the 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, making sure I'm gonna backstitch well on the top of my project. Now that you have the initial seam completed, we're gonna mark our bottom boxed corners. So you're gonna again measure at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance from the edge, not from the seam. And then from this mark, you're gonna mark 3/4 squares. Now that you have that marked, you're gonna cut this squares out. Now we're gonna be turning our project wrong side out, so it's a good idea to secure our ends of the zipper. I'm just gonna hand sew a couple stitches on each end. So now turn your project wrong side out. Roll your seams out and clip them all around the project. So now that you have the project prep like this, we're gonna use what it's called the French seam. So we're gonna sew along those 3 edges with the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, making sure we are enclosing our raw edges inside the seam. The French seam is now created. We can turn the project right side out to make sure we cut all our seam allowances inside the French seam. My seams are looking good. I don't see any seam allowances peeking through. If you do have that issue, just go back and just increase the seam allowance a tiny bit to catch those seam allowances that are peeking through. shouldn't be a huge deal. So now that we have our side seam and bottom seams done, we're gonna work on boxing our bottom corners. So we're gonna again use the French seam. So you want to make sure that the seam allowances are nesting against each other, so they are folded in the opposite direction, and that your side seam meets nicely in the middle. And clip that together. Here we want to make sure that when you folded your bottom seam, that it's going to be folded in the same direction on the other side. So I want to make sure that my bottom seam allowance, now it's folded this way. Now I'm gonna align the seams, making sure everything is nice and straight, and then clip it together again. When I have those two corners prepped like this, I'm gonna take it to the machine, and I'm gonna sew along those two open edges with the 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and backstitch well on the beginning and on the end of the seam. Now that my box corners are done on the right side of the project, I'm gonna turn the project wrong side out again. Push those seams out really well and secure them with clips. And now take it back to the machine and sew along those folded seam allowances with the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance to again make sure we are enclosing our row edges. After your French seam for your lower box corners, it's done. Now we're gonna work on boxing our top of our pouch. So we wanna open the top cuts and you want to align the seam with the center of the coil of the zipper, and you want to clip this together. Repeat that on the other side, and also I'm folding the seam allowance in the same direction that it's folded on the bottom, so just something to keep in mind. So I'm opening our cuts, folding the seam in the same direction, and making sure that it's aligning with the midpoint of the coil of the zipper. And since we're not going to be using the French seam technique on the top because of the zipper coils, we're gonna sew those two top boxed corners with the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance to match the final seam allowance of the bottom seam. So now take it to the machine and sew both open box corners with the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you can use 3.5 or 2.5 stitch. Now that our top corners are boxed, we're gonna trim the seam allowances to about 1/4 of an inch. You can also remove the little stitches that we did to hold the zipper together. After I cut the zipper, I like to melt it with the lighter so it doesn't fray inside of my seam. And this is the part when we're gonna use our binding. So you want to make sure you have 2 pieces that are long enough to cover the seam. This is a piece that it's 3/4 of an inch in width. So I want to make sure that I have enough to cover my seam. I'm gonna trim the ends after I sew the binding on. Now that I have my binding clipped and my seams encased, I'm gonna take it to the machine and I'm gonna sew the binding on with the 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the cut edge, and you can use 3.5 or 2.5 stitch length. But when you're sewing, just make sure you are catching both sides of the binding, so you're gonna be sewing through the bottom layer and the top layer. Now that the binding is sewn in, I can just trim the excess, making sure I'm not cutting any stitches. Also, now if you feel it's necessary, you can trim the inside panel. My vinyl's pretty stiff, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and just trim the clear vinyl a little bit. And at this point your pouch is completed, so we can turn it right side out. Your project is now completed. Your frame see-through pouch is done. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that you're gonna give the project a go. If you do, please make sure to share your results with me on a Facebook group or on Instagram. The link to my Instagram account is in the description box below. Till the next time.